My family cut me off, turned their backs on me, and now they're begging to be in my life after I made millions and proved them wrong. A very interesting life story. I never imagined that the people who once raised me, the ones who should have supported me the most, would turn their backs when I needed them. But that's exactly what happened. I went from being the black sheep in my family to being the one they all wanted to be close to when I made my millions. It was like watching a movie unfold in real life. And to be honest, I don't know how to feel about it. Here's my story. Part 1. The beginning of the end. It all started when I was a kid, right? Like most kids, I had big dreams. I wanted to make it big, have my own business, be successful. But the thing is, in my family, dreaming big wasn't exactly encouraged. I don't think my parents meant to be discouraging. It's just that we never had much money growing up. We were working class, paycheck to paycheck, and the idea of becoming something more than that felt unrealistic to them. They worked hard, but there wasn't ever any room for it extra. And I get that. Life was tough, and they wanted me to be practical. But I wasn't satisfied with that life. I always thought, there has to be more. Even though my parents said things like, you have to be realistic, I never let go of that dream of doing something bigger. I remember one of the first moments where I realized they didn't really support my ambitions. I was about 16, and I told my mom I wanted to start a small business selling custom t-shirts. She just laughed and said, "Who do you think you are, trying to be some entrepreneur?" It stung, but I didn't give up. I saved up enough money from my part-time job to buy a heat press and some basic materials, and I started making t-shirts in my room. At first, it wasn't much. I sold a few shirts to friends, made a little profit, but it was a start. And every time I'd mention it, my mom would just brush it off, like it was a hobby. My dad, on the other hand, didn't really say anything at all. But I could tell. He didn't think it was going anywhere either. But here's the thing. I was determined. I didn't have the luxury of believing the world was against me. I didn't even have the support of my own family. But I had something they didn't have. Drive. And that was enough to keep me going. I started putting all my energy into the business. I even skipped some of the weekend hangouts with friends, just to focus on building it up. I wasn't being reckless or anything, but I could feel that this was my shot. And the more I worked, the more I realized this was the life I wanted. Not just for the money, but because it felt right. But no one in my family really took it seriously. That's how things started to unravel. It was clear to me that my ambitions were too big for the box they wanted to keep me in. But that was just the beginning of the story. Part 2, the turning point. They cut me off. I think the moment everything really changed came when I graduated high school. I didn't go to college right away because I was too focused on making my business work. My parents had always pushed me to go to college. It's the only way to get a real job, they'd say. But I was different. I didn't want the real job life. I had this vision of something more. At first, I tried to explain to them that I wasn't against education. I just didn't think that traditional path was for me. I felt like I could learn what I needed through experience and trial and error. I was starting to get a small following online for my t-shirt business, and I could see the potential. But my parents, they didn't see it. They started getting more and more vocal about it. "You're wasting your time," my mom would say. "Everyone has dreams, but most people don't make it." My dad was even worse. He didn't say much, but his disappointment was evident. He didn't tell me to my face, but I knew from the way he looked at me that I had failed him somehow. It hurt, honestly. It hurt a lot. But the real kicker came when I told them I wanted to move out. I was 18, and I thought it was time to be on my own. My parents had always talked about independence, and I figured it was time to prove I could handle it. I wasn't asking for a huge amount, just a little freedom to grow. But when I mentioned it, things got heated. My mom cried. She said I was abandoning them. My dad? Well, he just shut down completely. They told me I had to pick between the business or the family. If I kept pushing this stupid dream, they couldn't support me anymore. It felt like a gut punch. I couldn't believe that they would choose to shut me out. But here's the thing. I was stubborn. I wasn't going to back down. And maybe it was childish or impulsive, but I made my decision right there. I chose the business. I chose myself. So, I packed up my stuff and left. I found a tiny apartment with the last of my savings, and I threw myself into my work. For the first time in my life, I didn't have the safety net of family behind me. It was just me against the world. But I thought I could handle it. I had no choice. It was lonely. Sure, I had friends, but No one really understood what I was trying to do. They'd tell me I was crazy to go against my family like that, but to me, it was the only way forward. I needed to prove to myself and to them that I could do it. But as the months went by, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. I had essentially been cut off from the people who were supposed to love me, no matter what. I was isolated in this tiny apartment, hustling every day, trying to make my dream a reality. And every now and then, a small part of me wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. But I couldn't go back. There was no turning around now. My path was set. Part 3, the struggle. The first few months were rough. I had no backup, no cushion to fall back on. Just a small apartment, a laptop, and my t-shirt business. I'd wake up early, spend hours designing new shirts, then advertise them online, hoping someone would notice. But sales were slow, really slow. There were days when I barely made enough to cover my rent, and it got to the point where I wasn't even sure how I was going to eat. I knew it would take time to get the business off the ground, but that didn't make it any easier. Some nights, I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a huge mistake. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was just chasing some pipe dream. But then, I'd get an order, just one sometimes, but it was enough to keep me going. And I started to get a few social media followers who liked my designs. Slowly, very slowly, I started building a community. I began connecting with people who actually supported me, people who were inspired by what I was doing. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was then that I realized something important. Success doesn't come easy, but it's about finding those small wins and building on them. The process was grueling. 12-hour days, constant hustle, never really having a day off. But every step forward felt like progress. Even if it wasn't much. Even if I had doubts. And just when I thought I couldn't push through anymore, something changed. My designs started to catch on. It wasn't just my friends buying them anymore. I was starting to get orders from people I didn't know. I even had a couple of influencers share my stuff. I couldn't believe it. That was when I knew this could really work. It wasn't a huge breakthrough, but it was the first glimmer of success. I didn't stop to celebrate. I just kept going. It felt like I was building momentum, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. Part 4, the breakthrough. After what felt like forever, things finally started to click. I'd been grinding day in and day out, trying to build my brand, but I wasn't really seeing the big numbers yet. It wasn't until about 8 months in that I had a breakthrough. I'd been experimenting with new designs and styles, trying to find the one thing that would set my brand apart. And one night, I posted a new design, a bold graphic that was unlike anything I'd done before. It was edgy, a little controversial, but it spoke to a lot of people. I woke up the next morning to hundreds of orders. I couldn't believe it. The orders kept coming in day after day. The post went viral. My social media exploded with new followers. And suddenly, I wasn't just a small-time seller anymore. I was a business. That's when I knew I had something. It wasn't just a hobby or a side project. It was real. I finally had a product that people actually wanted, and they were willing to pay for it. The revenue started to grow rapidly, and I couldn't keep up. I had to hire help, and that's when I started seeing the potential for real growth. But even with the success, I couldn't help but wonder, would my family ever see me as more than a failure? I didn't want to reach out to them yet. I still felt hurt by how they'd cut me off. But at the same time, I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, they'd start to see that I wasn't the screw-up they thought I was. Part 5. The first contact. It wasn't long after my business started to take off that I received a message from my mom. At first, I thought it was spam. After everything that had happened, I couldn't imagine her reaching out to me unless something serious had changed. But when I opened the message, it was real. She said she wanted to catch up and that she was proud of me. I was honestly shocked. The same woman who had told me I was wasting my time with my dreams was now telling me she was proud of what I'd done. I didn't know how to feel. There was a part of me that I wanted to just ignore her and move on with my life. But another part of me, an honest part, was curious. Curious about why now. Why were they reaching out after all this time? I took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, and responded with a polite but guarded message. Thanks, I appreciate that. Things have been going well, but I'm doing my own thing now. I wasn't about to let them think everything was forgiven just because my business was doing well. But then my dad reached out too. Same story. He said he was sorry for not being more supportive and that they had both been wrong about me. They wanted to reconnect now that I was successful. I didn't know if I could trust them. Part of me was still angry. Part of me still felt betrayed. But another part of me, the part that had missed the idea of family, was tempted. I thought maybe it was time to give them a chance to explain themselves. Part 6. The Reunion. A week later, my parents showed up at my apartment. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. I had imagined some awkward conversation, but it was different. They seemed almost nervous. My mom kept fidgeting, looking around like she didn't know what to say. My dad, on the other hand, was quiet, which was rare for him. It was like the roles had reversed. Suddenly, I was the one in control, and they were the ones trying to make amends. We sat down on my couch, and the conversation started slowly. My mom apologized again for how things had gone down. She said she'd been wrong to cut me off. She'd been scared, she admitted, and didn't know how to handle the fact that I was chasing something so uncertain. She kept saying that she only wanted what was best for me, but it didn't feel like an excuse. My dad, too, apologized. He told me that he was proud of what I'd accomplished, and that it had taken him time to understand that the world had changed. In his day, success meant a stable job and a house with a white picket fence, not running a business online. I understood that. But part of me couldn't let go of the fact that they hadn't been there when I needed them the most. We spent the next couple of hours talking. They wanted to hear all about my business, how I'd grown it, what challenges I'd faced, and how it felt to finally be successful. It was strange, almost like they were more interested in the success story rather than the personal side of it. I couldn't help but feel a little resentful. They hadn't been there when I was struggling, yet now they wanted to be a part of the picture because I had made it. But as we talked, I realized something. Maybe they had come around. Maybe they didn't fully understand everything I'd been through, but they were trying. And for the first time, I wondered if I could forgive them. Part 7. The Guilt. Even after the reunion, I felt this weird mix of emotions. I had worked so hard to get to where I was, and part of me felt like I had finally won. But another part of me, the part that had spent months pushing through with no family support, felt this nagging guilt. Was I really willing to let them back in just because things were going well for me now? I found myself replaying the past in my head over and over again. How they'd shut me out. How I'd been on my own, figuring it all out by myself. They hadn't believed in me, but now they were acting like everything was fine. I wasn't sure if I could just forget all that. They hadn't been there when I was struggling, and now they wanted to be a part of the success. It just didn't sit right with me. But as the days passed, I started to soften. My parents were trying, maybe not perfectly, but they were making an effort. And I realized something important. Maybe their lack of support wasn't because they didn't love me, but because they didn't understand. They were scared for me. They were scared for themselves. They had no idea what it was like to be in my shoes. I couldn't keep holding on to the resentment forever. But that didn't mean I was going to just let them back in completely. There needed to be boundaries. I wasn't going to forget the past, but I also wasn't going to let it control my future. Part 8. The Moment of Truth. It didn't take long before my parents started asking for more than just a relationship. They wanted something from me. After a few weeks of texting and occasional visits, they finally asked me for financial help. It wasn't a huge ask, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. They wanted me to help pay off some of their debts. At first, I was taken aback. Here they were, the same people who had cut me off and told me my dreams were useless, now asking for help because they were struggling financially. I felt angry, but I also couldn't ignore the part of me that still cared. They were my parents, after all. But I also had to protect myself. I had worked so hard to build what I had, and I wasn't sure if it was a good idea to just hand out money. There were a lot of emotions swirling around. Resentment, guilt, love, confusion. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what they had taken from me when they turned their backs. I told them I needed some time to think about it. And honestly, I did. I wasn't sure if I should just cut them off again or if this was my chance to heal the relationship. I didn't want to be taken advantage of, but at the same time, I couldn't just walk away. The whole situation was a reminder of how complicated family can be. Part 9. The Decision. I spent a few days mulling over the request. I kept asking myself the same question. Was helping them the right thing to do, or was I just setting myself up to be hurt again? Part of me wanted to help. I had the resources now, and maybe it was time to let go of the past. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another attempt to use me, to get something from me now that I was successful. I reached out to a close friend for advice. They listened to everything I had to say, about my parents, about the resentment I still felt, and about my own hesitation. After a long pause, they said something that stuck with me. Helping them doesn't mean you have to forget what happened, but it also doesn't mean you have to hold the past against them forever. You can choose to help, but on your terms. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I didn't have to throw myself into their mess, but I also didn't have to let bitterness dictate my every action. So, I decided to offer them help, but with clear boundaries. I agreed to help pay off part of their debts, but I made it clear that I wasn't a safety net for their future. They needed to take responsibility for their finances moving forward. When I told them, they were both relieved and thankful. My mom cried, and my dad gave me one of those rare, genuine smiles that I hadn't seen in years. But I wasn't fooled. This wasn't going to fix everything. It wasn't going to make all the hurt go away. But it was a step toward healing for both of us. Part 10. The Aftermath. Helping my parents out wasn't a magical fix. In fact, it didn't change much in the grand scheme of things. They were still who they were, financially struggling and sometimes blind to the lessons I had learned from building my business. But there was a shift in how we interacted. They were more respectful of my boundaries, and I wasn't as angry as I had been before. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a new beginning. Over time, I continued to focus on my business. I hired more people, expanded my product line, and started thinking bigger. The success didn't feel as empty anymore. Sure, it was nice to make money and have the freedom I'd always dreamed of, but the real reward was realizing that I had done it on my own. And then, one day, out of nowhere, I received a message from my mom. It was just a simple text. "I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry for not seeing your vision earlier." It didn't change the past, but it meant something. I realized then that no matter how much we try to plan out our lives, sometimes the most important parts of it are the moments of understanding and forgiveness. So, here I am, still processing the journey, still building my business, and still figuring out what family means to me. I'm not sure if everything with my parents will ever be perfect, but I've learned that healing doesn't come from holding on to anger. It comes from letting go and moving forward. Looking back, I can say that what I've learned is this. Success is not just about money or business. It's about the people we allow into our lives and how we choose to navigate our pasts. It's easy to get caught up in bitterness, especially when you've been hurt by those you thought would always have your back. But ultimately, it's not about forgetting the past. It's about learning from it, growing from it, and deciding how to move forward. To anyone out there who's been cut off by family or doesn't have the support they expected, don't let that define you. Use it as fuel to drive your own success. And when the time comes to face those who hurt you, decide what your boundaries are. You don't have to forgive immediately, but you can make peace on your own terms. If you've experienced something similar, or have been through your own version of this story, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Let's start a conversation. And, as always, if you found this story helpful or inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories. Thanks for listening.